For more on this, we can bring in Andrew Smith, a lecturer at Queen Mary University of London. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today on the program.
Thank you.
So, this level of animosity between the far right and the far left, has it always been there in France, or are we seeing something new develop here?
There's always been a history of political violence in France, and Lyon has traditionally been a place where that has often bubbled to the surface. Famously, of course, during the 1920s and 30s, there was a long history of street violence between groups on the far left and the far right, trying to impose and engage in kind of symbolic battles for the streets, often around newspaper sellers or occupying squares and corners and flying various types of flags. So certainly this has a long history. It's gone back, of course, after the formation of the Front National in the 1970s, we saw a lot more violent actions, particularly around the far right. And there has been really an increase in that in the last decade or so, where we've seen a lot more, for example, dissolutions of extreme political groups. Now, I think what we've seen here really is a clash between rival extremist groups. It's a really difficult moment, a dangerous moment. And I think, that reference I made to the 1920s and 30s, I think should frighten us all. And that's why it becomes so important not to create of this a moment which is about political tit for tat, about scoring points, or about politicians trying to, burnish their own image or their party's image or attack others. Instead, it becomes important to reflect on, the wrong steps, the intensification, the radicalization that led to this type of violence, and really to condemn any type of political violence which results in these horrible, horrible results.
Now, the former Prime Minister, Dominique de Villepin, warned that France was in danger of having its own Charlie Kirk moment. That a reference to the high profile assassination last year of the American ultra conservative activist. Do you agree with him?
I think there's a real danger here that this becomes a moment of quite dangerous political revisionism as well. We've seen especially those responding on the far right to the murder of this far right activist by accusing anti-fascists of being fascists, accusing those who fight Nazism of being Nazis. At the same time, the radical left, the far left, which has fueled this culture of violence. We've seen people arrested associated with this, being previously accused of things like anti-Semitic attacks. On either side, we have connections to political parties. Of course, we've seen one of the men arrested had connections to a France Unbowed MP. We've seen the rally being organised in Lyon today, being organised by a staffer with connections to the national rally. What this becomes is a moment when really a young man's death becomes manipulated and used for the benefit of others. Emmanuel Macron criticised, of course, Giorgia Meloni, saying that it's curious how many nationalists who seek to be left alone in their country seek very quickly to involve themselves in others. And that's really the big danger, I think. If we look to Lyon today, the presence of international groups, the presence of far-right groups who are associated with different types of movements shows that this is really a kind of tinderbox situation. And it requires, I think, real assumption of responsibility and a real calling for calm from all political parties. There's a trap here for the left as well. Of course, we look to the more sort of mainstream centre left, for example, the Socialist Party, and they are in a very difficult situation. They don't want to join in a pylon on the left and create this situation where it becomes associated with the more general left. Neither do they want to support La France Insoumise and its violent action, which they've, its violent rhetoric, excuse me, which seems to have somehow contributed to this type of action. That's the type of, trap that we see for the far left. And what it needs is an assumption of Republican responsibility. However, there's also a danger that the far right tries to further launder its reputation, further distance itself from the types of groups who it is very happy to see undertake this type of action in the streets, while distancing itself and trying to keep its hands clean. That's a really difficult tightrope, and I think it really strengthens the idea that the Republican centre is what needs to hold against these challenges from the far right, from the far left, and radical political movements of all types.
Now, in an opinion piece that was in the conservative Le Figaro newspaper, it said that since Daron's death, the political landscape has shifted. So, as you were sort of just discussing there, what sort of impact do you think all of this could have on municipal elections? Because the National Front usually does well in the first round, but then that kind of very French, the cordon sanitaire comes out and groups team up strategically to block them from the second round. But if the far left is now the new pariah, what impact will that have on the upcoming elections?
Well, I think it is a really challenging situation. We can see that already playing out in Lyon. We've seen the centre-right challenger for the mayoralty there, Jean-Michel Aulas, talking about whether or not a portrait of Quentin Durand should have been hung on the outside of the mayoralty. Of course, the mayor rejected this, and then it became a political battle about left, about right, about that kind of association. And so we can see the ways in which that sort of thing will kind of play out in these mayoral elections in numerous local situations in their own ways right across France. And this will, I think, change the political landscape because it will make it more difficult, certainly across the kind of the broad pluralistic left, for La France Insoumise to find partners to work with others, because more people will see it as being, unacceptable. It will also, I think, in many ways, present a political opportunity for the far right, the Rassemblement National, to try and launder its reputation and to increasingly try and present itself as being part of the political mainstream, positioning itself against the extremes. It's very difficult to see these norms, these bulwarks against extremist political rhetoric being eroded by activists on both sides. And I think what needs to be done is really to try and exclude that type of rhetoric, that type of fueling of this type of tension from political mainstream. I think if we look at this type of attack, we see the footage, the horrible footage which took place. We see people in hoods and masks carrying out violent attacks in the street. No one can feel that they represent anyone or any movement that they want to be part of. Whether they're left, whether they're right, that type of political violence cannot form a part of France's electoral landscape. And I think what we need to see is a real awakening that this is the danger that's represented by people's disengagement with political norms, by the fueling of political anger, by the meddling in France's elections by overseas actors, whether that
Yes.
be looking at all types of, tampering with information, whether it be, disinformation campaigns, whether it be foreign heads of states making
Right.
comments on political matters. It's a dangerous time.
Right. Thank you very much for your analysis, Andrew, and thank you for joining us on the program. That's Andrew Smith, a lecturer at Queen Mary University of London.